Is it just aging, or is it something deeper? Here are 7 red flags that might seem normal, but could be early signs of dementia. Let's break them down one by one, starting with the most overlooked. For many seniors, the very first sign of dementia doesn't start in the mind. It starts in the body, specifically in how they move. The red flag most families miss? A subtle shift in walking or posture. Maybe the steps get smaller. Maybe there's a new shuffle in the feet. Or perhaps the person starts using furniture or walls to balance without realizing it. These changes creep in so slowly they get brushed off as just aging. But they could be your brain's early distress call. It's not that muscles forget how to work. It's that the brain starts to misfire the commands. Researchers have found that subtle gait changes often show up before memory problems do. A recent study from the Alzheimer's Research and Prevention Foundation noted that seniors who developed a slower walking pace or unsteady gait were more likely to develop dementia within 3 to 5 years, even when they had no other symptoms yet. Think about it. If you notice someone walking a little differently, you'd probably chalk it up to arthritis, bad knees, or stiffness. But in some cases, that small shift could be the very first warning sign that something deeper is unfolding. A real-world example makes this even clearer. One caregiver noticed her mother started having trouble picking up her feet, constantly tripping over nothing. She didn't forget birthdays. She remembered recipes. But within 18 months, more signs of cognitive decline appeared. That change in walking was the brain's first cry for help. This is why paying attention to movement matters. A healthy brain coordinates smooth, balanced steps. When that starts breaking down, it's a sign the brain is struggling behind the scenes, even if memory still seems sharp. And here's the hopeful part. Catching this red flag early can lead to lifestyle changes that protect the brain. Activities like strength training, Tai Chi, and even daily walking can improve balance, coordination, and cognitive health. You don't have to wait until memory fades. You can act at the very first physical sign. So the next time you see someone walking differently, not limping but moving hesitantly or grabbing the wall to steady themselves, don't ignore it. It could be your signal to pay closer attention. Because dementia doesn't always start with forgetting. Sometimes it starts with how you move. What if the first sign of dementia wasn't forgetfulness, but the way someone pours a cup of tea? You see, the brain isn't just in charge of memory. It's also responsible for how we process what we see, hear, and feel. When cognitive decline begins, the senses, especially vision and spatial awareness, are often the next systems to falter, but these changes are subtle and easy to miss. Maybe Grandma suddenly starts bumping into doorways. Maybe Grandpa struggles to pour water without spilling, or hesitates on the stairs like he's unsure how deep the steps are. Most families chalk this up to aging eyesight or clumsiness. But in many cases, the brain is starting to struggle with processing the world accurately. This is called sensory misinterpretation, and it's one of the most overlooked early red flags of dementia. The person can still see and hear just fine, but their brain can't decode the information correctly. So they may misjudge distances, confuse textures, or feel off in familiar environments. For example, someone might suddenly avoid walking across patterned rugs because they look like holes, or they might struggle to button a shirt, not because of arthritis, but because their fingers aren't getting accurate instructions from the brain. According to a Japanese study published in Frontiers in Aging Neuroscience, issues like poor depth perception, reduced contrast sensitivity, and problems tracking motion were strongly linked with early cognitive decline. Even more striking, these sensory issues often appear before any memory loss is reported. One caregiver recalled her father refusing to go for walks after dusk. She thought it was fear of falling, but it turned out he couldn't judge sidewalk edges in low light. That fear wasn't irrational. It was his brain warning him that it couldn't process his surroundings like it used to. And when people stop trusting their senses, something else happens. They pull away. They stop going out, they stop driving, they start avoiding group activities. This creates a cycle of isolation and fear that only speeds up mental decline. But here's the encouraging truth. Early sensory issues are not a reason to panic. They're a reason to investigate. Eye exams, mobility tests, and neurological screenings can all help determine whether it's something simple or something that needs closer attention. The good news is the brain responds to sensory training. Activities like dancing, painting, walking in nature, or even doing puzzles with textured objects can help re-engage these brain pathways and keep them sharp. So, the next time a loved one says, "The floor just looks weird," or "avoid certain lighting or stairs," take it seriously. Don't laugh it off. Don't assume it's nothing, because when the senses start slipping, the brain may be waving a red flag, long before the words dementia are ever spoken. We all expect to lose a little strength with age. Stairs get harder, lids get tighter, muscles take longer to recover. But what most people don't know is that muscle weakness, especially when it shows up early or suddenly, can be one of the first signs of cognitive decline. This isn't just about being out of shape. It's about how the brain controls the body. Muscle movement starts in the brain. Every time you grip a cup, take a step, or lift a bag of groceries, it's your brain sending precise instructions to your muscles. But when the brain begins to deteriorate, even just slightly, those instructions become delayed, fuzzy, or inconsistent. The result? You may notice that your loved one is dropping things more often, struggling to open jars, walking with less power in their stride, or having trouble standing up from a chair, even though they've never had issues before. It may look like normal aging, but underneath, the neuromuscular link may be breaking down. And the science backs it up. A large study in the British Medical Journal found that seniors with reduced grip strength were at significantly higher risk of developing dementia. In fact, grip strength alone was a better early predictor than even some memory tests. Why? Because muscle strength isn't just about fitness. It reflects the brain's functional health. A physical therapist once shared a story about a man in his early 70s who had always been active, but over the course of just 6 months, his legs began feeling heavy. He couldn't push himself up from the couch like he used to. There was no injury, no arthritis. Eventually, a neurologist diagnosed early-stage vascular dementia. His first symptom? Weak legs. When muscle weakness shows up without a clear physical cause, it's time to consider what's happening neurologically. Is the brain sending the right signals? Is coordination still sharp? Are reflexes slowing? And it's not just about strength. It's about how weakness affects everything else. When a person feels physically fragile, they move less. And when they move less, blood flow to the brain decreases, accelerating cognitive decline. It's a vicious loop. The weaker the body becomes, the more the brain suffers. And the more the brain suffers, the weaker the body becomes. But here's the good news. This is one of the most reversible red flags if caught early. Movement fuels brain health. Resistance bands, light weights, chair squats, even gentle strength training can reignite the brain-body connection. Studies show that seniors who improve muscle strength also improve memory, attention, and emotional regulation. So if someone you love is getting weaker, not just tired, but noticeably weaker, it's not something to ignore, it's something to investigate, because the earlier you catch the link between muscle and memory, the greater the chance of turning things around. Not all signs of dementia appear while you're awake. In fact, one of the most overlooked and misunderstood red flags happens while you're fast asleep. It begins with a twitch, a sudden jerk, maybe even talking, yelling, or flailing in the middle of the night. At first it might seem like bad dreams, but for many it's something deeper, something known as REM sleep behavior disorder, and it's becoming a powerful predictor of cognitive decline. Normally, during REM sleep, the stage where vivid dreams happen, your brain temporarily paralyzes your body to keep you from acting out your dreams. But in some individuals, especially those in the early stages of neurodegeneration, this system breaks down. The body starts to move. The dreams leak into reality. You might see someone punching the air, kicking the blankets off, or even jumping out of bed while dreaming. It's frightening to witness, and confusing to explain. Most families shrug it off as stress or old age. But research shows these disturbances can precede dementia symptoms by years. In a groundbreaking study from the Mayo Clinic, over 80% of patients diagnosed with REM sleep behavior disorder eventually developed a neurological condition like Parkinson's or dementia with Lewy bodies. Even in Alzheimer's cases, unusual sleep behaviors, especially physical movements during dreams, are now seen as early warning signs of brainstem deterioration. One caregiver shared how her husband began shouting in his sleep. Sometimes he'd act like he was fighting someone. He even fell out of bed once during a vivid dream. He had no memory of it the next morning. It wasn't until years later, when his memory began to slip, that doctors connected the dots. The sleep disturbances were his first red flag. What's even more challenging is that most people don't remember their nighttime behaviors, so it's often the spouse or caregiver who notices the change first. That makes awareness absolutely critical. But let's pause here, because there's hope. Sleep-related signs are actionable signs. They tell us that the brain is trying to signal something, and with the right support, you can take steps to protect cognitive health. Tracking sleep patterns, undergoing a sleep study, and getting screened by a neurologist can help detect changes early. And here's a surprising twist. Improving sleep quality itself helps defend against dementia. Regular sleep schedules, low blue light exposure before bed, and calming pre-bed routines all enhance REM cycles and allow the brain to clear out harmful proteins during the night, a function that's disrupted in many forms of dementia. So if you, or someone you love, is starting to act out dreams, don't ignore it. Don't laugh it off as just dreaming wild. Because when dreams start getting physical, the brain may be waving one of its earliest red flags. What happens when someone slowly starts fading from their own life? They stop calling friends. They skip Sunday dinner. They no longer laugh at the same jokes. It doesn't happen overnight, but one day you realize the person in front of you feels different. Not because they can't remember you, but because they've pulled away. That slow disappearance, it's not always emotional. Often it's neurological. This is one of the most misunderstood early signs of dementia, a subtle personality shift that looks like withdrawal. The medical term is apathy, not sadness, not grief, but a loss of motivation, curiosity, and interest in life. And it's one of the first behavioral red flags of cognitive decline, especially in Alzheimer's and frontotemporal dementia. Unfortunately, many families mistake it for depression or just getting older and tired. Imagine this: a once talkative grandparent who now sits silently at gatherings, a partner who stops reading the newspaper, turns off their favorite shows, or declines invites without explanation. These changes may feel personal to loved ones, but they're often driven by the brain's declining ability to regulate emotion, motivation, and reward. One daughter shared how her father, a retired teacher known for his booming laugh and endless stories, started responding with just nods and one-word answers. No one suspected dementia at first. They thought he was sad or bored. But within a year, memory issues and language trouble followed. That silence, it was the brain quietly pulling away, and the danger is this: when someone loses the drive to connect, it accelerates isolation. And when isolation sets in, cognitive decline speeds up. It becomes a loop that's hard to break. The less someone engages, the more the brain atrophies. The more it atrophies, the harder it becomes to engage. But this red flag isn't hopeless. In fact, it's one of the most important to catch early, because small interventions can reignite connection. Studies show that activities as simple as gardening, listening to favorite music, or joining group classes, even online, can help re-stimulate emotional centers in the brain, especially if they're meaningful or rooted in routine. The key is not to push, but to invite. Instead of saying, "Why don't you come with us?" try, "I need your help with something." Purpose can spark action. Familiarity can trigger re-engagement. It's not about forcing joy. It's about gently reconnecting the circuits that give life its emotional spark. So if your loved one is fading in small ways, not forgetting who you are but showing up less and less, pay attention. It might not be personality. It might be the brain struggling to feel. And that quiet shift could be the brain's earliest whisper that something is changing. Everyone forgets words now and then. You know the feeling. You're describing something. You can see it in your mind, but the word just won't come out. It's normal. It happens to all of us. But when it starts happening frequently, when everyday words start slipping away or sentences trail off into silence, it could be a sign the brain's language center is starting to break down. And that's what makes this red flag so sneaky. It starts subtly. A pause here, a wrong word there. Maybe someone says book thing instead of magazine, or starts telling a story but can't quite finish the sentence. Families often laugh it off as senior moments. But when these moments multiply, they're no longer funny. They're a neurological clue. The region of the brain responsible for speech and language, called Broca's area, can be one of the first to show stress in early cognitive decline. When dementia begins to take root, the brain has a harder time finding the right words, especially nouns and names. That's why a person might substitute general terms like thing, place, or that guy more often. In more advanced stages, this can lead to aphasia, a frustrating condition where the ability to speak or understand language becomes impaired. But in the early stages, it might just sound like someone repeating themselves, using vague words, or struggling to keep up in fast-paced conversations. One woman noticed her mother stopped speaking up in family dinners. She thought her mom was just tired. But in reality, her mother was terrified of getting stuck mid-sentence. The fear of forgetting a word had become worse than the forgetfulness itself. And here's where it becomes even more complex. People often hide this symptom. They smile, nod, change the subject, or let others fill in the blanks. That means this red flag may go unnoticed until it becomes severe. But there's power in noticing the small things early. If someone you love is starting to avoid conversations, simplify their speech, or hesitate mid-sentence more often than usual, don't brush it off. Encourage open, pressure-free conversations. But there's power in noticing the small things early. If someone you love is starting to avoid conversations, simplify their speech, or hesitate mid-sentence more often than usual, don't brush it off. Encourage open, pressure-free conversations. And here's the encouraging part. Language pathways in the brain can be supported. Activities like singing, storytelling, and even reading aloud help reinforce those neural connections. Early therapy can make a real difference. So, when words get stuck, don't panic, but don't ignore it either, because sometimes the first sign of dementia isn't forgetting who someone is. It's forgetting how to say what you've always known. Most people think dementia starts with memory loss. But what if the real warning sign isn't what someone forgets, but what they believe? This is one of the most unsettling early symptoms families encounter, and one of the most overlooked. A loved one insists someone stole their glasses, but they're right there on the nightstand. They accuse the nurse of switching their medications. They think a neighbor is sneaking into the house even though the doors are locked. At first, these moments feel like harmless confusion. Maybe you laugh it off. Maybe you correct them. But slowly, these moments begin to stack up, and that's when it becomes clear. They're not just forgetting things. They're misinterpreting reality. This red flag is called delusional misperception, and it can appear surprisingly early in the progression of dementia, especially in Lewy body and Alzheimer's-related cases. The brain begins misfiring not just on memory, but on how it perceives and organizes information. And when that happens, reality itself starts shifting. One family member shared how her father kept insisting people were moving things in his house. First it was the remote, then the car keys, then food from the fridge. He became suspicious, even angry. But nothing had been touched. Eventually, doctors explained what was happening. His brain couldn't track events correctly, so it created its own story to make sense of the confusion. And that's the heartbreaking part. These delusions don't come from malice. They come from fear, disorientation, and the brain trying to fill in blanks that memory can't. For caregivers, it's emotionally draining. Correcting them rarely works, and can even increase agitation. That's why professionals often recommend redirection instead of contradiction. If someone insists something happened that didn't, try acknowledging how they feel, then gently shifting focus. For example, "I can see that upset you. Why don't we go sit by the window for a bit?" This helps soothe the emotional confusion without reinforcing the delusion or causing confrontation. What makes this red flag especially dangerous is how easily it can be mistaken for paranoia or moodiness. But it's a neurological issue, a miswiring in how the brain processes facts and experiences, and left unchecked, these misinterpretations can spiral, leading to fear, anxiety, and withdrawal. But here's the empowering takeaway. When families recognize this early, they can intervene before the stories grow larger than life. Memory clinics, cognitive behavioral therapy, and structured routines can help create clarity and comfort. So the next time a loved one says something that doesn't quite make sense, not just a forgotten name, but a belief that something untrue has happened, pause. Don't panic, but don't ignore it either. Because when someone starts misplacing reality, it's not just confusion. It may be the brain sounding the seventh alarm. Some signs whisper. These signs shout. At a certain point, dementia stops hiding behind subtle changes. It starts to take the wheel of everyday life. What was once a hesitation in speech becomes silence. A forgotten appointment becomes a forgotten face. And that once independent person begins to rely on others more than ever before. Let's begin with the most well-known, but also the most misunderstood. 1. Deepening memory loss that disrupts daily life. This isn't about forgetting where you put your keys. It's forgetting what the keys are for, forgetting your own phone number, forgetting the names of grandchildren, or confusing your daughter for your sister. The brain's short-term memory begins to unravel, and with it, the ability to carry out even the most basic routines. Someone may ask the same question multiple times in the same conversation. They may forget they've already eaten lunch. And as the days blur together, it becomes nearly impossible for them to keep track of time, place, or purpose. One son described how his mother, once fiercely independent, called him 3 times in an hour to ask if he was coming over for dinner, then forgot to make the meal. It was the moment he realized this wasn't forgetfulness. It was a system failure. 2. Trouble following conversations or instructions. Imagine trying to follow a story where every other word disappears. That's how many people with advanced dementia experience conversations. They lose track mid-sentence, miss the thread, or forget the beginning by the time someone reaches the end. This leads to confusion, frustration, and often quiet withdrawal. You might see someone nod along in a group setting, but they're not understanding. Or they may suddenly seem irritable or anxious, simply because they can't process the speed of interaction. And it doesn't stop with conversations. Following recipes, reading instructions, even understanding medication labels can become impossible. The world becomes overwhelming because the brain can no longer organize input in a meaningful way. 3. Personality and mood changes that feel foreign. This is one of the most painful shifts for families because it changes not just what the person forgets, but who they are. Sweet and gentle loved ones may become irritable, suspicious, or even aggressive. Others may sink into deep apathy, refusing to speak or participate in even basic activities. This isn't a reflection of who they are. It's a reflection of how the disease affects the emotional centers of the brain. One wife shared that her husband, once endlessly patient, began accusing her of hiding things from him. It wasn't anger, it was fear. He couldn't find the object, so his brain made up a story to explain it. And sadly, these emotional storms often push caregivers to the edge. 4. Declining judgment and unsafe decisions. Perhaps the most dangerous sign. A person's ability to make safe, sound decisions begins to vanish. They might dress inappropriately for the weather, leave the stove on, wander into unfamiliar streets, or even fall for scams and give away large sums of money. This sign marks a critical moment where family intervention becomes not just important, but non-negotiable. Safety is at risk, and the person may no longer understand the consequences of their actions. But here's what's essential to remember. None of these changes happen overnight. Most come on gradually. The person may have good days and even great moments, but the decline is real. And by the time these 4 signs appear, it's no longer enough to hope things will get better. This is when families need support from doctors, from therapists, from communities, because advanced dementia affects everyone in the circle, and ignoring the signs only increases the pain and danger. But there is still room for grace, still room for love, and still time to improve quality of life through the right care and connection. Dementia may feel like a slow fade, but the truth is, the earlier you spot it, the more power you have to change the outcome. Right now, millions of families are living in that fragile space between, is this normal aging, and is something wrong? It's filled with doubt, guilt, fear, and second-guessing. But here's what you need to hear. You are not powerless. Cognitive decline doesn't begin with a diagnosis. It begins with small choices. And that means the power to delay, reduce, or even prevent progression starts now. Every healthy habit, no matter how small, reinforces the brain's resilience. Every walk, every book, every brain game, every vegetable, every deep night's sleep, it's not just lifestyle, it's lifeline. Research continues to show that the brain is more adaptable than we once believed. Neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to create new connections, doesn't shut down at 60 or 70 or 80. It keeps going, if you keep going. But awareness is the first step. That's why recognizing the 7 early red flags is so important. If you've seen even one of these signs in a loved one or yourself, don't wait. Talk to a doctor. Get screened. Begin strengthening the very systems that dementia tries to unravel. And when advanced symptoms begin to appear, it's not the end. It's the beginning of a new kind of support, one filled with compassion, with structure, with connection, and yes, with challenge, but also with moments of clarity, of joy, and of love that still exist beneath the disease. Because behind every symptom is still a person, and behind every person is a life worth fighting for. The brain may forget, but your actions today won't be forgotten. They create a ripple, one that protects, supports, and empowers the people you care about most. So here's your next step. Keep learning, keep paying attention, keep showing up, for your mind and for theirs.